Hold on, bring it back.
Hey, it's Travis Ford, executive producer of the Endurance Town USA podcast, brought to you by our friends at Race Roster, a place where listeners like you can escape your daily grind and connect with your community of like-minded people. Today, Samantha Pruitt, our host and CEO and founder of Race Slow, sits down with Ian Adamson, the most successful adventure athlete of all time. He has 10 world championship wins, 22 world championship podium finishes, 18 international adventure race championship titles, and a gold, silver, and bronze medal from the X Games. He is also a three-time Guinness World Record holder for endurance kayaking. And after decades of professional race experience, which include product development for many of the running shoes we wear today, Ian is now president of World OCR, the world's governing body for all obstacle racing, and is currently working hard to make OCR an Olympic recognized sport. Sam and I sat down with Ian Adamson in his backyard on a beautiful afternoon in San Luis Obispo, and I'll let her take it from there.
Ian?
Yes.
How are you?
Better than ever.
Excellent. So we're at your house right now in your backyard. I should say, San Luis Obispo house.
Yes.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks for inviting us over.
Of course. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. And we're here to get to know you a little bit more as an individual, as a human being, less of an industry leader that you are, and we'll touch bases on that too. But there's a lot of things about you actually I don't know. So this is fun for me to be able to ask you questions candidly and have a little bit of a dialogue and maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive into you and who you are, what makes you tick.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's hear a little bit about where you grew up and your family history, your roots.
I'll start from the very beginning. How about that?
Yes.
So I am the illegitimate child, commonly called a bastard, illegitimate
Excellent.
child of a Chinese father and English mother. I was born in Australia, actually.
Okay.
My mother was a nurse, and she hooked up with the doctor.
Mm-hmm. That sounds reasonable.
Yep, it's a good idea. The outcome apparently was okay in my view, anyway.
Right.
And my father was my biological father, who I've never met, was from Singapore, and his parents were from China.
Oh, wow.
So my heritage is actually Chinese.
Excellent.
I'm half Chinese,
Okay.
racially, I guess. I'm half Chinese, and then half sort of English. My mother's mother was from the Middle East somewhere, and I don't know where exactly. I've actually got pictures of her.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jewish, so that makes me Jewish because it's
Wow. You have a little bit
maternal.
of everything going on.
A little bit of everything. I am a true mutt and a bastard, is what I say. like a good little dog.
Yeah. But you were actually birthed in Australia.
I was born in Australia. I was born in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah. My adopted parents, my real parents, I call them, were both academics, and they taught all sorts of odd things. My father was strangely, his PhD was in agriculture, but his work was in climate change.
Wow.
So this was back in the 70s.
Before it was even a
80s,
thing.
Before it was a thing. His colleagues were figuring it out.
Okay.
So I got schooled as a kid, all through my schooling, from a little kid through to university. He was poring over giant satellite images of things and doing core samples out of the Rift Valley in Africa and Antarctica and on and on and on. So he and his colleagues were quite alarmed by the 80s. They were very alarmed about what was going on.
So
and clearly grew up in that environment. My mother she's a double PhD. She was, the Germans call her Dr. Frau Doctor.
Wow.
Because you include your husband, so he's a doctor and she was a doctor. Her expertise was in plant physiology, but her second PhD was in women in education. So she was leading in Australia women in education. Had a radio show on ABC and whatnot for many years.
Both of them cutting edge. I mean, seriously, for the time.
They were inquisitive people.
Yeah.
They asked a lot of questions.
Almost.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. And I can't claim any intelligence from either from any of the people.
Influence, yes.
Influence, for sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it proves somewhat the idea of environment or nature versus nurture. Yeah. Although I did meet my biological mother, and there's absolutely no question she was my mother. Mannerisms.
How old were you?
40.
Wow.
Things that you would not expect. Speech patterns, mannerisms, things that you would think, that's got to be environmental. No.
fascinating.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's very cool. Are you still in touch with her?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
No, I wouldn't
Just more of a
choose
curiosity.
her as a friend.
Okay,
It was a really good experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Australia. Do you have siblings then?
I do. Brother and sister, both in Australia now. They actually had moved out. My brother lived in the US for quite a while, married a American woman. So we actually moved with our parents at quite young age. Moved around a lot. They made TV shows for the Open University in England in the early 70s. So we lived out there for a while. Went to school in England. Came back with English accents, as you do when you're little kids. And then I moved to the US in '91.
How old were you?
26.
And what was your intention coming to the U.S.?
Well, I worked for a biomedical engineering company, and I was a design engineer. And they were moving the factories from Sydney to Miami Lakes. I actually moved to Denver area. And one of the reasons I did the move, was it was a temporary assignment, but I had full designs on going to Boulder and becoming a full-time athlete.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my goal and exit strategy out of biomedical engineering.
When you were young, were you already in athletics? Was that part of this really intelligent family you were?
Yeah, they were talented. I was not. I'm a grit athlete, meaning I can grind it out and I'll figure out a way to do it. But my brother and sister were very talented, still very talented. I mean, my sister could sail through the athletic system and, make state level apparently without a whole lot of effort, and I ground it out. So I went for stuff that people hated, like 800 and 1500, stuff that was just appallingly painful, because that was what I had. I could suffer. That wasn't a problem.
How old were you when you got into sports?
I was really young. My grandfather was a soccer international for Scotland, and he was also the head of at the time the Australian Soccer Football Federation, so the National Federation for Soccer or football. I didn't know much about it at the time. In fact, it's only in the last 5 years I really understood what he did. But he had all sorts of stories about, I was with X, Y, and Z Olympic marathoner doing this and that and the other. And, as a kid, it's just like, oh, yeah, whatever, Granddad.
Yeah, it wasn't cool then.
Now I was like, holy crap, I had no idea.
Right, exactly.
So he was basically doing what I'm doing now at the international level. He was doing it full on for a long, long time. I think almost until he passed away, he was involved, because he'd been an international athlete and he had worked in the federation system.
So what was your first sport then? Was it football?
It was. Yeah, I guess it was football, because I started about 6 and then worked my way through. So I was in soccer for quite a long time, about 12 years, ended up as a coach and a ref, and played at second. It was basically the second division in Sydney, which is, there were like 130 divisions. So it wasn't a horrible player, but I wasn't as good as my granddad. So did that, but I was, and still am, somewhat of a pingy athlete.
What does that mean?
Pinging, I would ping. Like I would try everything, partly because I liked it. And
like ping pong. Check this out.
Yeah, pinging between sports. So I played football, which I really loved. And then I got involved in cycling because my dad was quite a good cyclist. He was so at 40, in the 40 plus category, I think it was called veterans in Australia, he was quite good. And he performed, he would compete at state and national level. Okay. And so, we were looking at Dad riding his road bike going, Dad, I want to do that. And he would be, no, you're not going to do that until you really demonstrate you want to do it. And then it was like this gradual process over years of, you sure? Yeah, you sure? Yeah. So eventually I started racing road bikes. Eventually I think I was 9.
Wow. That's incredibly young to be racing road bikes.
It was the youngest category for competitive cycling in Australia. Wow. At the time, the the categories had fun names. Midget.
I'm sorry, what?
Midget.
That was the name of
that was a category I started in, midget.
That is now politically incorrect.
Yep.
Okay.
So we started in the midget category.
I see.
And you could ride a fixed gear 66 ratio bike as a midget.
What kind of distances?
They were quite short, probably less than an hour.
Okay. Well, that's not short for a 9-year-old. It's not a sprint.
It's not a sprint. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not a sprint. I mean, it was real road riding. Okay. And then the next category was sub-juvenile.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh.
And then you got a fixed gear at a 72 ratio.
Wow.
A single gear. It wasn't fixed. It was a freewheel. It was a single gear.
Yeah.
The next category was juvenile.
Fascinating.
And then you got 5 gears. And then you went to junior. And you got a full 10 gears. And then you're like, back in the day, that was it. And we rode in nylon. And instead of you didn't have a chamois in those days. You had Vaseline.
Yep. Well,
Nylon and Vaseline. And we had wool jerseys.
Nice.
It was the Northern Suburbs Amateur Cycling Club, and it was a red jersey with a black stripe across the chest, made of wool, scratchy as shit.
Do you still have any of these?
I don't know. I doubt it. My brother might, or my sister might have them tucked away somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so went through the cycling ranks and could get to national level, but very low level. I mean, state I could make top 10, but that, so cycling I did that for a while, loved it. Stayed in it for quite a few years, and then university got grabbed by canoe and kayak.
Okay.
It was a friend of mine who misled me terribly.
Like a lot of them do.
Yeah, I said
we still have those friends.
We should try this. It'd be you'll really like it. It's going to be really fun. What are we doing? Yeah. Oh, we're gonna paddle our kayaks on the Hawkesbury River. And I thought that sounds really cool. Kind of tranquil river, around Sydney. And the first time he said, okay, we need to get you a boat. And we lived on the water in Sydney Harbour. So this is a friend of mine from elementary school. Met him at 2nd grade, and this was in university at this point. So he said, oh, yeah, you'll love it. Come and we'll do some paddling. So we jumped in some boats, and we would start paddling it every morning before university, before class. Class started early, so we started really early. And these paddles got longer and longer and longer. And finally I was thinking, Graham, what's going on here? We're going like hours now. What's going on? He said, well, it's kind of a long race. I mean, we start in the evening up in Parramatta, out near Windsor somewhere, which is way west of Sydney. And then we paddle all through the night. What? All through the night? You got to be kidding me. What have you got us into? And of course, I paid the entry fee and everything. This one, like, oh, for goodness sakes. All right. Turns out it was this 111-kilometer overnight race called the Hawkesbury Classic. And
this is in college.
It was long in college. I was probably 84, I think, somewhere around there, 84 or 85. Mm. And so we did the race as a team. So with the 3 of us, 3 boats, 3 single kayaks, and I think we came 2nd or 3rd. And at that point, I'm thinking, oh, this is kind of cool.
And I'm pretty good at it.
Horrible sufferfest.
Yeah.
Just miserable. Sitting on your ass for 12 hours. Good God. And then, so the next year I got a better boat. Mm-hmm. We all got better boats, and then we won. And then the year after that, I was like, oh, this is great. Figured out how to deal with the butt problems, and now the times are getting pretty good. So I got some friends of mine, one of whom was an Olympian, just got back from, would have been 88, so would have 88. He just got back from the Winter Olympics. He was a Nordic skier. So he and his brother Rod joined with the team with myself, and we then we didn't break the record, we crushed the record. Oh, nice. It actually stood for almost 30 years. It just got broken. But they changed the starts.
What school were you in at this time?
University of Sydney.
Okay. What were you studying?
Mechanical engineering.
Okay.
I actually started in architecture, but my brother was an architect, so then I switched to aeronautical engineering.
I'm just thinking about the amount of discipline to compete at that level when you're in college, and there's a lot of parties to go to and other things. I
partied with the canoe club.
I see. Yeah. So there was a social life there, and Tom.
There was a social life. It was a good social life because we did all sorts of activities with the canoe club, and it was a good canoe club. We had 4-time world champions in kayak. We had all sorts of good paddlers, and so the competition level was very high. And we competed in all sorts of stuff, slalom, sprint, marathon, canoe polo, which is actually quite big, and not just competed, but I think won worlds at canoe polo. We had world champions in kayaking, in sprint. We didn't have any in slalom, but we weren't very good in slalom. And I picked up Australian University's champion in C2. That's 2-person canoe downriver, so it's as fast as you can go downriver. And we organised championships and stuff. And on the way, I got involved in governance in sport, which is actually where I first got exposed to this stuff on the University of Sydney Sports Management Committee, which is basically the sports governance organisation at the University of Sydney at the time.
As a student body? Or?
Student body.
Okay.
Yeah, it's run by the students.
All right.
We paid. It was interesting. Back in the day, we paid one of the few things that was mandatory fee was this 50, I think it was $53 a year. We had to pay a sports management fee to the University of Sydney.
Part of it.
Other than that, you basically got paid to go to school. It was called a Tertiary Education Assistance Allowance, or TEAS.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's like these days, but it was a good system. You got to school because you were smart, not because you had money.
Right. And did you graduate from there?
I did.
And what was your degree?
Mechanical engineering,
Okay.
with a major, in the US context, a major in basically biomechanical.
At this point, did you determine that you were more interested in sport or more interested in pursuing your career?
I didn't really know. Typical graduate.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked biomedical engineering, and I love sport. I sailed too. I spent a lot of time sailing. I started sailing at 8.
Mm-hmm.
The people at our neighbors who had little sailboats were the importers for windsurfer.
Nice.
Back when they were
That's good
teak.
friends to have.
Yeah, teak. So basically, they were sailors,
Mm-hmm.
and so I learned to sail at a young age. Basically, I think 7. I started racing little dinghies at 8.
I just don't even know how you have so much time for all of this stuff. It's phenomenal that you're cramming all of this into the life of one individual.
Well, when you're at school, there's actually a lot of free time, but I never had free time. I made no free time, meaning I would fill up the day. Most kids, I don't know what kids do these days, but I
don't think they're doing it this way, Darren. I really.
Well, I would train, and I would train early. Yeah, I would train early.
Yeah.
Well, I think part of it, I'm convinced part of it's being adopted, is there's this, you don't even know it at the time, but there's this drive to achieve. I don't know why. You see constantly, like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But at university, I guess I was fairly unusual because I would get up at 5 or 6 in the morning and train for a few hours. Then I'd go to school, and the school hours were really long. I was trying to do a 4-year degree in 4 years, which is quite hard. Most people took 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing about 40 hours face-to-face class time, which is not really feasible because you need about 2 hours out of school for every hour you have in school.
Yeah.
So I'd be up before dawn, and I'd train. Then I'd go to school. I'd catch the train. I'd sleep on the train. Go to class. Probably swim at lunch at the pool with Dawn Fraser, who was the coach there, and she was an Olympian, multiple Olympian, gold medalist.
Australia's full of rock stars.
Very well known for having a policy of having sex before races.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, she's well known for it.
Indeed. Okay, well that's
and medaling. Like she had multiple medals in the same events in multiple years. That was Dawn Fraser. So I'd swim at lunch and then do afternoon classes. In fact, the workload was so high that this guy Graham, who tempted me into kayaking,
your buddy from kindergarten.
My buddy from kindergarten, we couldn't physically get to the classes because you would end up with overlapping classes, which is why it's very difficult to do 4-year degrees in 4 years. So we would attend each other's classes if they clashed, and then swap notes, and then buckle down, and then we'd sit down and we'd go through the classes. We'd teach each other effectively.
What I love is this is very strategy oriented and team oriented right out of the gate. Like you just understood that that's how you were going to succeed, and so were your teammates, whether it be him or otherwise.
Always better together.
Yeah.
Work great. Mm-hmm. And we're friends to this day.
Work smart, not hard.
And both. Work
right.
hard and work smart. So that was college. I actually took, ultimately, it was really 6 years because typical Australian, took a year out after school, went sailing around South Pacific up the Great Barrier Reef.
After graduation?
After high school.
Oh, okay.
Yep, after high school, before university. And in Australia, you don't graduate from high school. You basically, the most stressful thing you do in your entire life as an Australian is your high school finals, because that sets you up for what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So basically,
that determines your college.
Dictates where you go, what university you get to, what degree you can get into. So that's a big thing. So then, after that, it's pretty stressful. So a lot of people take a year off. So I went sailing for a year. Mm-hmm. Then did 2 years of college and took another year off. And then I traveled through Asia and Africa and Europe, went to China. Wanted to look at my roots a little bit.
When you graduated, why did you determine, or maybe there was something else before this, to come to America?
So when I graduated college, I interned at a biomedical engineering company after third year. And then after fourth year, so after third year in college, I was working at this company. It was called Telectronics. It was like Medtronics, basically. They were about the same size at the time. It was bought by Siemens ultimately. But so I worked at this company, Telectronics, And they only accepted medal winners from the universities, and I wasn't even close. Like, I was okay. I could get through. I was definitely not. I was not your 4.0
You mean
student.
scholastic?
Scholastic medal
That's
winners,
right.
like
Not
the top
athletic.
in the class.
Yeah.
They would take the top in the university graduate classes from all the top disciplines. So they had medical students, engineers. They had the people they needed for the company, and that was not me. So what I did is I walked into the company, which was fairly local to where I lived, and I sat myself down and said, "Look, I'm going to work here whether you like it or not, and I'm happy to push a broom. I'll clean the lab." And they said, "All right, fine, that's fine." Yeah, they said that's fine. You can sure come and clean test tubes. So I did.
Excellent.
And then so I did that for 3 months after the end of my third year at college, and
you got really good at cleaning out those test tubes.
I got so good at cleaning test tubes they offered me all the jobs of the graduates after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
So then I got to pick my job, which was research and development. So I went to R&D in this biomedical engineering company.
Nice.
It was heart pacemakers and implantable medical devices, basically.
Was this in Sydney then?
And in Sydney.
Okay.
A couple of years later, they said, we're going to move shop to... they didn't say they were moving shop. They said we're going to open up production lines in the United States.
Mm.
They had purchased General Electric's pacing division, Quarters Corporation's lead division. They were buying up companies. And so I put my hand up and said, I'll go. And they said, great, 3-year assignment, off you go. So I did.
And that was Colorado?
Well, the head office in Colorado, and the factories are in Miami.
So you went from Miami, Colorado, back and forth?
Yes.
Okay.
So ended up working a lot in Miami. One of the attractions of going to Colorado was Boulder, because a lot of people I knew, a lot of athletes in Boulder, and a lot of people I knew had gone to live between Boulder and San Diego.
Okay.
There are a lot of triathletes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big attraction for me, and I had designs on success in athletics. I had designs on that from a very, very young age. I used to read the Guinness Book of Records and looked at goldfish swallowing and juggling eggs or whatever it was. And
what can I be good at?
What can I be good at? There had to be something.
Sure, of course.
If it's odd enough and obscure enough, you can find something.
Right.
So I had that in my mind from a very, very young age, probably before I was 10 for sure, maybe 6 or 8. So I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Mm.
I never made it. I was on the Australian canoe team, and couldn't. I mean, we went to Worlds and a few things and did well, but that's not solo. That's the big difference. But I like team stuff. I was always quite adept at team stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Tried in sailing, got a medal at World Cup, and then row gaining, which is long distance orienteering or time limited orienteering, did quite well at that as well.
This is all making so much sense why you eventually became an adventure athlete. All of these parts and pieces and your skill set and your background.
Yeah, no good at any one thing, just averagely good, but really collectively good at it all.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put it all together in aggregate.
That's what makes you good, right? Is like you have to have all the skills. It's a well-rounded performance that's required. And then, of course, picking the right teammates is also helpful.
That is very useful. Communication skills are good. That's where the education part comes in. I think what we learn at school is we learn how to learn how to be inquisitive. Mm. And that's a really good setup for later life, I think, in all sorts of ways. At any rate, we were talking about the Olympic thing. So I was thinking about it. Sailing, Olympic sport, didn't make it. Cycling, Olympic sport, didn't make it. Triathlon was not Olympic sport, but was still, there were good athletes in Australia at the time. And there's always good athletes around. There's a lot of good athletes. Yeah. I didn't have the focus or the skill sets or the athletic ability to compete as an individual athlete at running or cycling or swimming or any of that stuff. I think I probably could have done it in sailing if I'd really put my mind to it. But like I said, I ping. Yeah. I'd be off doing something else or doing them all at once. George. I'd be sailing in the morning, and sailing in the afternoon. I'd be riding my bike in the morning and paddling in the afternoon. I mean, it was just, I'd do it all.
It sounds really more like you were in pursuit of joy or what was going to bring you pleasure that day, in addition to being an athlete, right? So your training regimen was so much more well-rounded than the average person. That sounds like a good thing. That was probably the problem too, is that I didn't really have a training. I didn't have a training regimen. My training regimen was. Coaches wouldn't necessarily agree with. No, definitely not. But what I would do is I would spend. I mean, I could easily spend 12 hours in a weekend doing a constant output of run, bike, kayak. I mean, to the point where when I got into kayaking, I really got into it, and so I would paddle my kayak to work. It was a 10K paddle to work.
and I could run down to the waterfront. I could put my Olympic kayak in, and I'd paddle to work, 10K. I had a parking spot, so I put my kayak in my parking spot.
Nice.
And then in the afternoon, I'd paddle home again. And quite often, I'd go further. I'd either, then I'd maybe paddle up the river another 10K.
After
And
work
so,
or something.
so I'd make it a 40K day.
Right.
And it would be quite common for me to do that kind of behavior. And on days when I was sick of kayaking, then I'd ride my bike or run.
And then, just out of curiosity, you have coworkers, right? What are these people thinking? Like, what's the story with Ian? He's a little nuts.
Yeah, sort of. And we were all nuts in some way.
Or were they like, hey, I got to get a piece of this. This looks pretty good. Was there that?
No, people were into their own things. They were... Aussies are kind of weird anyway, so, we're crazy for the most part. That was normal crazy behavior, I guess.
So what was your next career transition? Where did you go professionally after that?
So professionally, the company I was working for had bought a company called Cordis Corporation, or had bought their lead divisions. Their leads division, electronic leads. They're implantable leads, electronic. You plug them into a pacemaker and then basically attach it to your heart. They bought the company that made those and inherited all of the IP and the technology and the products. And so I ended up managing that as the project engineer. And the company, unfortunately, one of the products, it was called an atrial J lead. So it was a lead that had this J-shaped hook on it, and you fed it. You straightened it out by pushing a stent, which is a fairly stiff piece of metal down the middle, and these are tiny little things. And then you could feed it through your subclavian artery, which is in your neck basically, or your shoulder, and then into your heart. And then you pull this stent out, this rigid piece, and the hook, or the J, would go back to shape. So it would hook into the atrium.
Wild.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Except some genius at Cordis years ago decided that the spring mechanism to make the hook reform a shape would be just a little leaf spring, so a little bent piece of wire, basically. Really bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is that your heart beats about once every second, right? Or so, something like that.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Well, that's 3 million beats a year.
Right.
That's a lot of beats.
This thing's going to wear out.
The thing, and then they broke.
Ugh.
Then these little springs inside your heart.
Yeah.
These little springs will break, and then you've got basically a knife.
Great.
A very, very sharp, stiff piece of metal, and they would puncture the heart from the inside and cause cardiac tamponade, which is basically you just put a hole in your heart and you're not going to last very long because now you're bleeding out from your own heart. And that obviously was not good. So I ended up managing that. That was a fairly stressful time.
I should imagine, yeah.
Had to do a redesign, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was they were implanted in 100,000 people.
Wow.
Maybe not 100,000, maybe 60,000. It was a lot of people. And so the morning call, so working with the FDA and managing this, I had a pretty big team, probably 100 people in total managing this stuff. And the Monday morning meetings were the kind of the fatality ones. It's oh crap. And then, because we inherited this, but it doesn't relieve you from the necessity and responsibility of managing the problem and thinking that there's 59,900 people out there with them, and what's going to happen to them?
Yeah.
The problem was extracting the leads was a traumatic surgery. It's open heart surgery basically at the time. You can't just pull them out because they get encapsulated in tissue.
And you can't necessarily put out a recall to every single one of those humans. Hey,
we can't recall them. I mean, there's nothing you could do.
Mm.
So that ended up sinking the company. So they inherited this bad product, and they're managing 60,000 people out there who, the fortunate, it's never fortunate. Most people would not live long enough because they were fairly old. The demographic of for it to go wrong back in those days. So it was, most people would die of natural causes, and it would never affect them. But that's not everyone, and of course that was something that we would pull, not just all-nighters or weekers trying to figure that one out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that. The company then got the IP really got bought by Siemens. Actually, Sunju Medical was the company that ended up buying it, but it got absorbed by Siemens, the giant German company. And then Telectronics was no more. Now, during that whole episode, I retired myself I resigned gracefully from the company and then went back as a contractor and a consultant.
Okay.
That was the transition to being an athlete.
You stayed in Denver?
Yeah, so I was living in Southeast Denver at the time.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that allowed me the freedom So I doubled my pay, halved my work hours, and then I could train.
Excellent.
Now, while I was working there, so I worked there from 91 through almost 98, through the end of 97. So during that period, I lived in downtown Denver, and then the company was near Parker, so it was about a 20-mile commute, and I would either run or ride.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd run or ride to work, and then back again. So I was doing 40-mile training days. And then at lunch, I would usually cycle with the cycling team around Cherry Creek State Park, and then at night I would usually train in the pool and or an alternate days kayak. So I was having 4 to 6 hour training days while I was working.
What sport were you gunning towards? What was your goal here?
Well, at that point, I was still looking at kayaking. Actually,
Okay.
I was working on a project. I was at the time I was actually working on a project to set the Guinness Book of World Records for endurance kayaking, and it had been around for a really long time. It was set. The previous one had been set in 1986 on the Vistula River in Poland, and it was generally thought to be an unassailable record. It was 186 miles, which is a pretty hefty distance.
In a kayak?
In a kayak, yeah.
Whew.
So of course, I'm looking at it going, I can beat that. So I had my sight set on 200.
Reasonable in Ian's world.
I had my set in 200 because people thought I was out of my mind. They said, "No, you can't. No one can paddle 200 miles. That's stupid." So of course I'm thinking, hell, I'm going to do that. That sounds great. Watch me.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. So in '97, I did exactly that. I went to the Colorado River.
Okay.
Bad choice, as it turns out. Good enough, but a bad choice. And I paddled an Olympic class downriver kayak, which is a fairly unstable, quite quick boat, but good for big water.
Okay.
So you can paddle. A proficient paddler can paddle in grade 5 rapids, stuff that rafts flip in. And so I
cover a lot of distance.
Cover a lot of distance, yeah. So I did that. I paddled from basically just below Lake Granby at Pump House, where the commercial rafts put in, and paddled basically to Moab.
How many miles was that?
203.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah, I think Big Bend, was where we took out, but it was not good because it was dangerous.
Yeah.
One, big rapids,
For sure.
really big rapids. My safety kayakers couldn't keep up.
Okay.
They'd get in and get out and get in, but I'd drop them, or they'd flip and they'd have
They'd have
problems.
to catch you.
What happened though was it was a full moon, but it was cloudy, so it was dark. And going through below Palisade through the Grand Valley, I don't know if anyone knows this area. It's kind of where it's all the peach trees and the grapes and stuff kick in, and it sort of opens up. The river got really high and was quite close to the bottoms of the bridges. Good, fast flow, but at night when you can't see, all you hear is this huge roar, and you know there's a bridge coming. And eventually I just freaked out, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm going to die.
Scary.
It was scary as shit. And then so I pulled out, and I lost a ton of time and distance because the clock's going. You
Waiting for the
can't
sun
stop
to
the
come
clock.
up, basically.
Basically, yeah. So at that point I went, oh crap. So I probably lost 4 hours of paddling, and just went around the big bridges and then put in again. I can't remember exactly where it was, just below Grand Junction, like Fruita area basically. And
So
then paddled through.
You broke the record.
Yeah, by a few miles.
Big
So
time.
203. And I'm thinking at that point, shit, that's not good enough. I got to do better than that. So I kept working on the project.
You were not satisfied with that.
Not even close.
Okay.
Yeah, not even close. So at that point, I'm thinking, got to get a better river that's not as dangerous, and I got to change my boat up. So I ended up. I spent a lot of years scouting this whole thing. I've been doing this for a long time. I'd been thinking about it since about 1988.
You're not obsessive.
No, I do have.
Not at all.
I'm patient.
I see.
I would say I'm patient.
Okay.
So I worked at it, and then I ended up on the Teslin River.
Where's that?
In the Yukon Territory, Canada.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, I was
Colder
actually wanted
waters,
to
but yeah.
cold, but better,
Mm-hmm.
open, less rapids. Bad year. I went up in '98. Went up the next year, and had the Outdoor Life Network Canada TV crew with me because I wanted to get it fully documented. And it didn't do well because there was forest fires, there was a drought. The river, we hit bottom on the river a lot. We just kept bottoming out. The support boat couldn't get through, so that we ended that one. I think I actually broke the record, but I didn't claim it. And then went up again in 2000-ish, maybe 2002 or 3, I can't remember exactly. Got on the Yukon.
Okay.
Had the same problem. Slightly wrong time of year. for some reason I kept thinking I had to be there on the summer solstice was not the right time.
Well, you were looking for nightlight.
I was looking for daylight,
Oh, longer daylight.
longer daylight, not best flow, and the river was too low.
Mm-hmm.
So I did break the record again. I think it was 2:18 at that point.
Kept up in the ante.
Kept up the ante, but I kept thinking, this is not right. It's a patience game, so I had to figure out right time of year, right flow. And there's random things. Did the wind come up? Is there a forest fire? Is there all this stuff goes on? And eventually in 2004, right before my 40th birthday, got a pretty good year. And at that point, I was inviting people. I was saying, "Hey, you should come do this. It'll be a better record." So I got a few people to come. There was a British guy and I think a Molokai winner. We had a few good paddlers, and then we made it a race. And it was good enough. It wasn't great, but it was good enough.
Mm-hmm.
There were some problems, usually it's always going to happen. It's like life. Life happens.
Yeah.
Another mistake. We had 3 good paddlers with 1 support boat. Bad idea.
Yeah, you're going to get spread out.
Well, it didn't really anticipate. I thought we'd kind of go together and there'd be a real race. Turns out that didn't really happen. I got so far ahead. I mean, I think at one point I got 40 miles ahead of one of the guys.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
So
the support boat is trying to...
It isn't both.
Yeah, and the Yukon is this braided
Massive
river. It's got islands that can be a mile, 2 miles long and like 6 different ways to go. And, of course, the support boat lost me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm paddling. I went for like 4 or it might have been 6 hours with no support. And I was like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah.
Hot, dehydrated, no food, no water, no support. But I'm thinking, it's over again. I've got to try to come back next year. Well, I didn't come back next year because eventually I got back to the boat and recovered a bit and then paddled to the finish and did 262.
Okay, if you were not satisfied with that, we have a problem. Please tell me that was a win.
It was good enough.
Okay.
So I call it. At that point, I'm done. And then I got all sorts of calls from people who want to do it. So Andy, US canoe team, 11-time US champion in downriver, then did it a few years later. 2013, I think. I gave them all the information. Hey, use this river. Here's the support boat guy. Start here. Go to there. I gave them all the information. Now, I mean, I want people to break records. I think that's what they're for. Mm-hmm. And then another guy claims he did it, but some of us are pretty skeptical.
Nobody quite witnessed that, huh?
Yeah, but maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. Yeah. Andy and I, here's the thing. You know the good paddlers. You know who they are.
Sure.
They're the guys on the US team, and they're going to the Worlds, and they're winning all this. And then someone pops up without that stuff and just does it, and you're going, but we've never seen them. Do they do this in isolation? How do you get good when you don't compete for 30 years against your peers? I don't know how you do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not impossible, right? But it's unlikely.
Slightly mysterious.
Slightly mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a little skeptical, but you know what? If it's good, it's good. Great, fantastic.
Right.
So that was that business. 2004 is that one.
When was your leap into adventure racing?
That started...
You're still pretty young. I mean, at least the pictures I've seen.
I was quite young.
Mm-hmm.
It really started with my dad, who was effectively, he was out in the field a lot, so he would drag us along at a very, very young age, 3-4 years old, caving and climbing and out in the wilderness and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So my exposure and immersion in the outdoors was from a young. It was innate at that point. Just being comfortable with the map and compass and running around in the wilderness and where people get freaked out and they might get eaten by snakes or something. And it's fine. That's when it started. But the formal adventure stuff really came from my Olympic buddies who had been kayaking with.
Okay. And
they were doing adventure racing in Australia back in the early 80s.
That's really where the sport originated, correct?
Well, the early roots actually from the United States.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a race up Mount Rainier back in early 1900s. It was a true adventure race.
Wow.
It was from the ocean.
That's cool.
You bicycles and canoes, and then you end up climbing, summiting.
Oh man, we have to find some pictures of that.
I'm sure they're around somewhere. It's fairly well documented.
Okay.
Went for a couple of years. The second year, though, the organizer's cousin or brother or something fell down a crevasse and it was too dangerous. And there's no roads in those days, right? It was just the only way to get up was a river. Mm-hmm. So they'd paddle their canoes up the river and climb up the mountain. And I mean, real adventure.
Crazy.
True adventure. That was a long time. Then the Kiwis and Aussies were doing it in various forms from the 70s.
When was your first race, adventure?
'84, I was a support crew.
Okay.
My buddies, the Hislops, Rod and Dave Hislop, they were racing.
Okay.
And no, that race, the race that we were doing there was called Wild Trek back in the day, and it was Nordic skiing, then orienteering,
Okay.
mountain biking sort of, but those days they didn't really have mountain bikes.
Mm-hmm.
Some people had them. We had cross bikes, cycle cross bikes. Then wild water kayaking. It was a 2-day race.
Okay.
It was fast.
What
Pretty brutal.
about that bit you?
Well, the most retrospective enjoyment, it's one of those things, I watch these guys doing it as a support guy, and you're out of your minds. There's no way I'm doing that. It's just freaking miserable. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
What on earth possesses you?
Typical crew.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, pretty quickly, they said, oh, you should do it. It's really fun. So I did it with a friend of mine, Keith Tuffley. And because it was 2 people. It was too dangerous to do it solo, really.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ate it, you would probably die. So they made you do it as a pair, so both of you would die or something. I don't know.
Right.
So I did it with my friend Keith. And the first year we did it, got to the finish, and it was brutal, man. It was just suffering. At that point, that was the most suffering I had ever done in any form, like mental, physical, emotional, just soul destroying.
Saying a lot with somebody from your background. Yeah.
Well, I was early 20s, and you kind of know, I was doing triathlons and stuff and long distance kayaking, but this was hard, brutal, and consequently, I absolutely loved it.
Yep.
Got to the finish line. The most accurate thing is common, I think, is you get to the finish line, they hand you a beer, and you go, that sucked, I'm never doing that again. You drink a beer, and you go, that was great, I'm going to do that next year.
Of course, exactly. Sign me up.
Sign me up. I'm in.
And then, of course, the mentality like you have, which is, I think I could do better. I could do this differently. You know, I learned a lot. And being able to take that information and progress.
Yeah, so I did a few of those through until I came to the US, and that didn't exist in the US. So I actually would go back to Australia and compete every now and again, which was fun.
Back see the family.
Jump in races in a team with some people, and we'd do all sorts of fun stuff. In '95, well, it was really 1989. The Ray Gouaz was on ABC Sports in the United States. And that was the first exposure in the US. And then Mark Burnett got a bee in his bonnet about wanting to compete. And so he put together a team, and he figured Navy SEALs would be, or the US Special Forces would be the right people. So he put teams together, and he competed in a few raids. I think he finished on maybe Madagascar. So it would have been about 91 or 2, somewhere around there. And that kind of got the conscience going in the United States, and then he got a license from Girard Fusy from Red Gouaz to run it as under the name Eco Challenge in the United States, the contiguous states.
What year was that?
95.
Okay.
So he put it on in 95, and then I saw that and went, oh, yippee! Here's something I know. Got some of my buddies who had been winning stuff outside the US, which was the only place it was, including the raid.
Yeah.
So basically the winners. And we put together a team. Then we showed up in Utah. A boy was intimidating because we're a bunch of like these ruffians with book bags, right, and running shoes. And we see these like buff soldier types with all their backpacks and their bells and their whistles and their uniforms and they all look all strong and stuff. And we're like, oh god, we're going to be just smashed in this race. We've got no chance. Well, of course, looks can be deceiving.
Totally. So
the ragtag bunch of Aussies and Kiwis and an Irishman and whatnot, we did well. We finished a day ahead of the next team.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's actually phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, we did okay. And at that point, we're going, oh, they're not as good as they look. Let's do some more of this. So we went to the X Games a few weeks later. Had 2 teams in the X Games. Kind of split the team. And this became the rule, actually. We would all inevitably have, and we formalized it eventually, but we inevitably have multiple teams in any given race. And we'd usually place first or second, or first or second or third or something like that. So that set the stage, and then so we did X Games for 3 years, and we always won. We always basically came first and second.
How many years were you actually racing competitively in the adventure space?
From the earliest days, I guess it would have been 85 until 2007.
Wow, that's a solid career right there.
Yeah, but full time it was only 13 years, I think.
That's still a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot longer than I expected. So when I started, when I when I left my job at Telectronics, when I resigned and went back as a contractor, that lasted a few years, and then I really did feel that I could go. Well, the Eco Challenge did it. It came along came television, along came money, sponsorship, advertising, and went, oh, all right, now's the time. So that's when I went. Then I retired. When I completely quit the biomedical space and went for being a full-time athlete, and it worked. But at that point, so now we're in '96. No, that was '98. So in '98, when I was actually full-time, I figured I'd have a 3-year transition period, a 3-year life. It made sense that this is a hard sport. It's long, it's difficult. There's the athletes winning are world champions in some other sports. They're mountain bike world champions and kayak world and outrunning champions. I mean, there's world champions all over the place. It was full of world champions. And this is a tough sport, and it's competitive. And there's a lot of money. I mean, a good year, there'd be $1 million in prize money. So we were, real people were chasing real money. And I looked at it and went, oh, crap. I got about 3 years. I better have an exit strategy. So my exit strategy was I'll go to the event production side and the television production side.
Which you eventually did.
Which I did in those 3 years. That's exactly what I did. But then I lasted another 10 years. So, so I got a bonus.
But then you were doing both. So you started pursuing endurance sports as a professional career choice.
So that's right. So as a sports professional, I was racing and producing simultaneously for about 10 years. And it was really just contracting to events, a lot of work for IMG. Actually through our first sports agent, Murphy Reinschreiber out of San Diego, who was representing people like Paul Newby-Fraser and Greg Welch and Kaylee Jones and the triathlon crowd. And he saw what was happening at Adventure and went, oh, I want some of that. So we ended up with Murphy. And Murphy was also an event producer working for the big guys. So he would have all sorts of us from the athletic side work on events because we knew racing.
Exactly.
So we would show up to places, it would China and Malaysia and whatever for these events, and it'd be the staff would be Heather Fuhr and Rock Fry and Paula Newby-Fraser, and we'd be the staff.
Fun. Yeah.
So we'd be there. We were his athletes, and then we were also his staff.
Wow. And
I stuck with it because I liked it. I really liked producing stuff.
What did you like about it?
Great question. I like that sport encourages people to move. Right. I mean, that's the bottom line. It really comes down to you're going to do something and you're going to be passionate about it. Make it useful or make it at least something that's productive or healthy. Because a lot of stuff people get into is not so healthy and not so productive.
Right, for hobbies.
For hobbies. And sport, and that stuck with me, is that I've always liked the idea that people innately want to move and it's what they do. Kids at the beach don't run screaming from the beach in the opposite direction. They keep their shoes off and they run across the beach and splash in water. That's what kids do. Adults do the same thing. They may not admit it, but they actually do the same thing.
Yes.
So that's innate to humans. We want to play. People do not want to work. They want to play. Like going to a gym and lifting pieces of metal, that's work. That's a workout or a work in.
Or a work in.
A work in. That's not playing.
Right.
Which is why obstacle sports today, that's playing.
Which is your new genre. Not new. You've been in obstacle sports for a while. You transitioned from adventure to obstacle.
Yeah, sort of. Well, by all sorts of convoluted means, but it did end up being back in sport. Never really left it because another thing that happened while I was producing stuff and racing was that we were sponsored by originally Reebok, and then Salomon for many years, and then Nike, and actually for GoLite for 1 year.
Nice.
And so the design center for Salomon was in Boulder. And since I lived in Boulder, literally 1 block from the design center, I would walk on in, and Bob Africa was one of the chief designers there. And I got to know the staff really well, and I was an athlete, so it made sense for me to work with them to help with the shoes. So that's exactly what I did. So I worked with these designers and the whole crew out of the Boulder Design Center. And we made stuff. They were the first lightweight kind of running adventure shoes. I think Via actually came out with the very, very early ones in the 80s, but then the stuff that you see today on people's feet, that's what we were designing. It hasn't changed much.
Right, so that makes sense because I knew you used to be involved, maybe you still are to some extent, with Newton.
Well, yeah, it's somewhat. I mean, peripherally, yes. The Salomon thing is interesting. I'm just going to go back to the first shoe that we produced, which was we called it an adventure shoe. It was the Raid Wind was the name of it.
Okay.
If you look at the Raid Wind, and you look at any Salomon trail shoe today, it's the same. It just hasn't changed that much. I think Bob was really the chief designer with some other designers. He really nailed it. He made a thing that was light. It's basically an abuse-proof running shoe. He did it right.
All terrain,
yeah, pretty much. We did the same at Nike. We replicated. I think we did an even better job at Nike. It took our learnings from working with Salomon, and then we did the same thing at Nike. Is that they were very good with. You want something good? Well, you better help out because you're the guys. You're going to use it.
Right.
They were really good at doing that. And they were fast. So we would get shoe designs and work with the designers and we'd get very fast iterations of products. So we end up with a thing called the Nike ACG Orizaba, which is really a copy. Yeah, Orizaba. I don't know what it means. It was a copy of the Raidwind, basically. And then that shoe, it was absolutely dominant in the market while we were racing. It was a very good shoe. Very, very good one. Yeah.
Fun to be on the forefront of that technology.
Yeah.
And to be an athlete in the space and seeing all the evolution. I mean, it's like bizarre almost how far everything's come, right? What you've seen in your lifetime as an athlete, especially starting that young in products and in methodologies and everything.
Well, and it was a lot of products because we worked with the guys at Catula who make the winter running stuff, winter running spikes. They started with a lightweight crampon, and we worked with them with basically feedback, like you should do this and you should do that, which they were quite good at listening to. And Catula quite quickly started dominating lightweight mountaineering. So Catula, like the world record for climbing Everest, is on Catula stuff.
Oh, I see.
And then same with Go Light. We worked on their packs and their bags and all that sort of stuff when they were around. Now my trail, but Dimitri Kupinis and Kim, his wife, were running it, and they were in Boulder, quite convenient. So we were their first team and helped them with their designs. Being in Boulder, simple, just walk into the office and help out. So that whole paradigm shift from big, heavy, full-shank hiking boots and heavy packs to ultralight, fast packing stuff, that was all pushed by adventure racing.
Yeah, and this is like in the 90s, like late 90s? What?
Mid to late.
90s. Okay.
Yeah, mid to late. So that ultimately, sort of coincidentally led to Newton Running, I guess, because I was at the Boulder Creek Festival before Memorial Day. So the Memorial Day weekend in 2007, they had just launched, and Danny Abshire must have recognized me from TV. He was one of the co-founders, and Danny pulled me into their space. They were on the mall, on the Pearl Street Mall, in the old one of the store. It had been a Prana store or something, I can't remember what it was, but it was one of the storefronts, and they just rented the empty space, and they would bring their product out. And I'm skeptical, and I'm a Nike guy. I was covered in my Nike gear, and he said, "You should try these." I said, "Sure." So I put them on, ran Boulder next day, and absolutely loved the shoes. Thought they were just magic. Couldn't figure out what was going on, but I realized they were good. Yeah. And then got to know Danny and Jerry Lee, the financier and other co-founder, and realized that they really were. There was like 6 people in the company, and I'm coming from a company with 60,000 employees. And I'm like, holy crap! How do you do that? And I don't think they really knew how they did it.
Yeah, but nimble.
And
creative.
Yeah. Bob Taylor was the guy in Asia who was doing it all with his partner, a guy called H.G. Sir. And they were making it. Basically 4 of them were really doing the whole thing. And I went, hey, I got some skills. You should employ me.
Yeah.
So they did.
Oh, excellent.
Not an employee, I was a contractor.
Okay.
So I headed up product development. Did that for quite a few years.
Love it.
5 years.
Like the jack of all trades.
Yeah, and at the time I was producing, I'd started a thing called 24 Hours of Triathlon.
Okay.
Still going.
Is it?
Yeah, it's still going. It's out back east somewhere. But what that was I was looking at 24 Hours of Moab. Literally 24 Hours of Moab, going, hey, you could do that in triathlon. So I approached the guy who owns the 24 Hours of races and said, do you see conflict if I do triathlon? He was like, that's fine. Apparently other people had tried 24 Hours of stuff, but if you didn't ask him, he didn't like it. So I went, fine, I'll ask. So I did. And he said, great, go for it. So I did. And then ran this thing, 24 Hours of Triathlon, for a few years. Started in 2006, lost my shirt, lost about $75,000 the first year, typical event. Marketing budget, that was my marketing. Typical expensive marketing.
Yeah.
Next year, broke even. The year after that, made a lot. we got so big so fast that, at that point I had Suzuki and
Sponsors.
Red Bull, and had big sponsors and big festival set up as a whole. We took over the entire Cherry Creek State Park. We were busting out the scenes. We got in trouble because we had people trying to park all over the place, and it got giant. And then I was over it. Like, did that. So I gave it to a guy, Cole Braun, who had a charity. I thought, oh, that's good. Yeah, he can make money on the charity thing. So I gave it to him. And then now I think his son runs it. So it's probably in its 14th year now. So that still chugs along. We did 8 hours as well.
Okay.
The whole goal, one of the goals was, it was kind of cool actually, because in an 8-hour race, think about an Ironman. How many people break 8 hours in an Ironman?
Oh, please.
Not many, right?
No.
So what the thing was, it was a little slower because there was a lot of it was very short. It was 1/10 of an Ironman. Every leg was 1/10 the distance.
Okay.
So you did 10. You did an Ironman.
10
like 10 swims, 10 bikes, 10 runs. But you had to do them in order: swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run, swim, bike, run, until night, because you couldn't swim at night. So then you would bank. So you'd try and bank your swims. It was very strategic. People absolutely loved it. We created world championships. We had world records. It was all super cool.
This was just a crazy idea.
It's a crazy idea.
Turned into reality.
Super fun. Became real. Newton sponsored it. That was actually the pitch. That was the original pitch. Hey, you should sponsor my race. That was what I did. And then I go, you do what? Hey, maybe you should employ me too.
Right, exactly.
So they did. So they sponsored it. And then I ended up heading up product development, and then R&D, and then medical, and then education, and built out a global system of educators across 26 countries.
So obstacle racing, at what point, what juncture did you transition? Were you in race production at obstacle racing? Were you actually competing as an athlete?
Nope.
How did you get into obstacle racing?
Well, it was Joe DeSena. So rewind to the 1990s. We had met racing. He was doing adventure. He was doing all sorts of stuff. Okay. Joe DeSena had made a fortune on Wall Street, and he was he had a travel company, corporate travel, out of his New York office, and he loved to race. So at one point, it was probably about 2000, maybe even at the, I don't know, it might have been the Borneo Eco Challenge in 2000. He said, "Hey, I want to put on a race." So, okay, fine, contact me. So we did through a guy called Russ Antonacci, and then we put on the thing called Expedition BVI. It was right around or just after September 11th, 2001. Also right at the edge of a hurricane called Hurricane Olga, which was exciting.
These might have been some indicators of where this was going to go.
Yeah. So
the universe was speaking.
Yeah. So the outcome was, the race was fantastic. It was unbelievable. We hired 50-foot yachts for all the teams, and we went and we basically sailed around to each island in the BVI, and then we'd let them overnight. We had agreements with resorts like the Bitteren Yacht Club, and we'd sail into the Bitteren Yacht Club, and then we had 24-hour segments. So you had 24 hours to finish each day.
Okay.
And so the fast teams could get it done in something reasonable, like 12 or 16 hours.
And then rest.
And the tail enders would barely make the cutoff. So some teams would wind up at the Bitteren Yacht Club, and they get a room, and they'd be like living in luxury, drinking Mai Tais and sitting by the pool and living it up. And other teams would struggle and collapse on the beach and sleep for an hour, and then start again. So
I love it.
That's what we did, and we went out to these really cool places. And the BVI is a pretty amazing place. So we had this absolutely spectacular race. And in the tail of the hurricane, there's all sorts of stories. The whole podcast around those stories. You should set me and Joe down and talk about it. But it's freaking crazy. Awesome. Crazy shit happened. We had one finish. We had the grand finish on the final day at a boat called the Willie T, which is a floating bar.
Okay.
People basically get drunk and naked and jump in the water. And
excellent. So
that's what we did. We basically said, to finish, you have to. We prefer you get naked, but you got to take a shot from the shot ski. It was a wave ski with 4 holes drilled in it with 4 shot glasses.
While you're in the water, just floating?
No, you had to take a shot, run up to the top of this old pirate ship looking thing.
Okay.
Jump into the water naked was the idea. That was the finish. That was how you finished. Well, you didn't have to get naked and you didn't have to drink alcohol, but pretty much everyone did.
Right.
And we also did things like, one of the finishes was you had the limbo at Foxy's Bar. It's a very famous bar where on the Millennium it was Mick Jagger and it was a whole crowd of A-listers at the bar on New Year's Eve. That's Foxy's Bar. Okay. So our finish was at Foxy's, doing the limbo with Foxy out there calling it, And so you had to limbo into the
This
bar.
sounds like my kind of adventure.
Oh, it was so much
We
fun.
might have to bring this back.
Well, and there was another finish we had at a place called, no, it wasn't a finish. It was in the middle of the race. One of the mandatory items of equipment for the race was women's lingerie.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we had women's lingerie, and they had no idea what this was for because we didn't tell them.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was...
It was in the mandatory gear?
Mandatory gear. So during the race, there's this place called the Bomber Shack on Tortola. The Bomber Shack is famous because on a full moon, Bomber, this huge native guy, has like a witch's cauldron, which is absolutely enormous. It's probably 3 feet across. It literally looks like a witch's cauldron, and it's hallucinogenic mushroom tea.
Oh, jeez.
And it's free.
What is happening?
Yeah, so the Bomber Shack is... but at the Bomber Shack, which is literally a shack...
At its best
yeah,
now.
so you got this shack, kind of over years, decades, has been built out over the water from the road. So it's basically a roadside, like literally a dusty road by the water, and he built this shack, which was just... It started off as a tiny, tiny little wooden shack. And over years and decades, it grew to this really big bar. But it was still a kind of lean-to thing. And what would happen is somehow, some way, at one point, women would start taking off their panties and stuff and nailing them to the bar.
I see.
So at this point, in 2001,
in this
there was thousands and thousands of pieces of lingerie just plastering this giant lean-to bar over the ocean. And there's Bomber. So we had Bomber would be the checkpoint guy, right? So he'd do the checkpoint.
Yeah.
And the lingerie was to be nailed to the bar.
Okay.
Now some of the athletes wore it.
Sure.
Because they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So
Seems like a reasonable thing.
Yeah. So then there were athletes. Elena Usher, who is still an active adventure athlete, I think a very good one. I think she's won coast to coast. So Elena was wearing hers. She's on the finish team, right?
Nice.
So, and she's not an ugly chick. So Elena, I was there. I was thinking, oh, this is going to be good. Yeah. And they're standing there, and they couldn't quite understand that. Like, what do you mean? You got to get your laundry, and you got to like nail it up there. And they're going, and then she goes, shit. She was wearing, so she stripped off, took it off, and up it went.
I love it.
Yeah. So that was Expedition BVI, and that was how I got involved with obstacle racing ultimately.
Okay.
Because Joe and I stayed in contact over the years, and he had all these crazy ideas. Like he started a death race, and he had so many different things going on. Mm-hmm. It was like he was just really good at throwing mud, like me. We'd just throw mud at the wall to see what would stick. And one of the things was Spartan race. So early on, there was really a couple of people that were driving this expedition BVI. Colleen McManus was one of them. She ended up living basically in the Virgin Islands with the Prime Minister's family. So she was kind of this white girl in the in the family, like de facto family member. Mm-hmm. She called me one day and said, "Hey, we're trying to do this thing called Spartan Race, and we're trying to do this and that." And so I would help them with various projects, like we need to get in the military. And I was teaching at Air Force bases, so I would go and say, "Hey," so we'd coordinate through things, and over time the Spartan Race got quite big. As we know today, and I always stayed kind of on the periphery. Just it was all pro bono stuff. I was just helping out my buddy, and then Joe, with these crazy ideas, at one point in 2013 said, "I think we want to go to the Olympics. Who should do that?" Colleen said, "Oh, Ian can do that." So she called me, and I went, "I don't know. That's not that easy, but I'll take a look at it." So I did, and after about a year, it was evident that taking a brand is not possible. You can't take a brand to the Olympics. There is no mechanism for it. There's no structure. It's not how it's done. You have to have an international federation with so many years of governance in X number of countries and a huge amount of structural and systematic stuff that even qualifies you to be recognized as a sport. And obstacle racing back in those days wasn't even. It was an activity.
Right.
A lot of races, a lot of people doing it, tons, thousands, millions.
Amateur sport.
But an activity, great. Right. In which everything starts as an activity. Frisbee started, climbing, everything else starts as an activity. So my answer back was, all right, great, fine, but it's not going to happen. Certainly, it's definitely not going to be Spartan Race, or any other race for that matter. Mm-hmm. However, at that point, I was really intrigued because one of the things that the people have been saying, and what I've been learning was, sports take a really long time to become a sport, take even longer to get recognized, and if they get recognized, you might have a chance at getting a medal event at a games if you're really lucky, because there are hundreds of recognized sports and thousands of non-recognized sports, and of the hundreds of sports, there's only 28, maybe in Tokyo, 33 sports in the Summer Games, 33. And this is recent. Until Tokyo, there was only ever going to be 28.
Yeah.
28 sports, that's it. So your chances are remote at best. And knowing this,
the irony is, you said, I accept this challenge. I mean, at some point, you stepped up to the challenge.
well, this is
what you're doing.
this is like the kayak thing. It's like the 24-hour kayak record. Oh, you can't do that. No one can do that. That's never been done. You have no chance. There's no way you can get. And if you wouldn't live long enough. At which point I'm going, I'm in.
I'm all in.
Yeah, I'm all in.
All in.
Not only is it, you tell me it's impossible, I am definitely in.
Exactly.
You tell me you can't do it in 30 or 50 years, I want to do it in 10.
Yeah.
So
you're on the charge.
So I'm on the charge, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm doing. There's some very fortunate and somewhat unfortunate echo chambers. The reason that obstacle sports exists the way it does today, obstacle racing, and it is not new by any means. We were literally competing in national championships in many of them in obstacle racing in the 90s and 2000s, but without social media, it didn't get any traction.
Yeah.
The high-tech series manufactured obstacles exactly as you see today. Nets and walls and A-frames and all of the stuff you see in races today, we were doing exactly the same stuff.
Well, and the military's done this forever for their training. It's called training and boot camp, for God's sake.
It was formalized as a competition at West Point in 1946 and is under the it's basically under the World Military Games and has been since 1946. It's been around for a really long time. Yeah. Exactly the shit that we're doing today. Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
Feel free.
In the 90s and 2000s, there was a high-tech national series with prize money, and it was a real true national series. The Balance Bar, fully televised. These were TV shows with money and competitions and national champions and teams, and on and on. And then the Muddy Buddy series. These are all obstacle races, actual obstacle races that people would look at today and go, "Yep, that's an obstacle race." Mm-hmm. And so when people say, "I don't understand the link between adventure and obstacle," it's just the words.
Right.
That's all it is.
And the difference. Well, we were friends before this. We have that serial entrepreneurial illness, right? We just like what we've got going on. We can't help ourselves. It's fun.
Yeah.
But now we're working on Primal Quest together, and in particular the World Championship expedition piece to OCR. So, how's that happening for you, and how exciting is that? We're pretty pumped.
Yeah, I'm pumped because that's where I came from. I also see the natural progression. It's a very obvious thing if you think about it objectively, not from I love doing Savage Race and that's what it should be. That's one perspective, but that's just one person's perspective. And plenty of people in the community will go, "This is what I do. It shouldn't be anything different." The purists. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting discussion though, because you could say the same thing about running. I run 10Ks, therefore nothing else in athletics should exist.
Right.
That's the same argument.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not a reality, because if you're a dedicated road runner in 10K and that's all you do, and you don't marathon and you don't do 100-meter sprint and you don't do track stuff and you don't do the ultra marathon, it doesn't negate the other ones. It doesn't mean ultra running is not valid or the 100 meters is not valid. They're completely valid. It's just not what you do.
Yeah. Exactly.
Fine. Same with obstacle. It runs the gamut. Interestingly, one of the things that we've actually implemented, we're really into it, far in now, is Ninja OCR. People see American Ninja Warrior on television, the NBC show, and most obstacle course racers who do, say, whatever, Tough Mudder, Spartan race, they look at American Ninja Warrior and they say, "Cool, that's great." A lot of them don't look the other direction because that's not OCR. The way they do it, it's still obstacle racing because you're racing and there's obstacles. It's still the same thing. Mm-hmm. If they look the other direction, they start to look at stuff like Ultra Beast and World's Toughest Mudder, and they start to get outside that end of the world and they go, "Yeah, but that's not valid," which is odd to me because they're all valid. They're all obstacles and they're all racing. Well, it's a continuum, just like running.
The irony is that in adventure sport and expedition sport, it's using the outdoors and the natural obstacles and the natural terrain that is called Mother Nature and the planet to actually facilitate the sport and the competition. Isn't that really?
Absolutely. I mean, an obstacle is an obstacle. You see it in a Tough Mudder. You see it in a Spartan race. You see it in virtually every race in the outdoors, is that they use the natural terrain to their advantage to create the obstacles. Okay, you're going to carry this weight up a hill and downhill. They use the hill.
Yeah.
Adventure racing is exactly that.
Right.
And yes, you may actually carry something up a hill. You might carry your kayak over that thing.
Yeah. Or your teammate.
Or your teammate. Or your pack. Or your food. Or your. So you actually do it. I think this is why it's a continuum, is that big natural terrain obstacles are still big natural terrain obstacles.
Yeah.
And if you go to a big scale, it could be a continental scale. And we did back in the day, we did events where you cross from, say, Tibet around Everest and then over the Himalayas and down into Nepal and India. And it's big obstacles, but they're gigantic obstacles.
Right.
But they're still real and they're still obstacles.
And one of the things I'm attracted to, and I think you as well, is the team piece is huge. And then the mental piece. Like the longer the race, the more mental a skill set and training is required to succeed, not only to survive and sustain the event, but to actually succeed.
It's I think most people who go along will appreciate that it gets way more than mental.
Mm-hmm.
For most people starting out in any sport, it's really to do with athletic ability and physical capabilities. So if you do your very first, when you do, let's say your first obstacle course race is Tough Mudder, very common, right? So
Yep.
you got this 10-mile thing.
Drug.
The gateway drug. They do this thing. Their buddies. This is the social media part. They kind of know about it because their friends did it, because their friends did it, and they know about it because they did a selfie with the beer at the end and their money.
Facebook told me so.
Yeah. Facebook told me that this is great, so therefore I'll do it. Their friends say come do it, and they do. They'll probably never run a 5K, and it would never run on the road because that's silly.
Right.
But
yeah.
Come out and run around Copper Mountain at the Tough Mudder for 10 miles and absolutely thrash yourself for 8 hours. And they're all in.
Yeah.
And you're going, that's great. So the gateway gets them in. And at that point, it's about 99% physical because they have probably never gone that distance. And it's physical. It's brutally physical.
Muscling through it. They're very big on team. Everybody helps everybody.
Yep.
That's, the mindset.
Never climbed a wall, never been underwater in mud. They've never done this stuff. And they do it the first time, like my first race, adventure race. And I got to the end and I'm thinking, like one step from the finish, I'm going, this sucks. I am never doing this again. This is stupid. Another step after, with a beer in my hand, that was great. That's the best thing I've ever done. Same, the gateway, Tough Mudder is a gateway. And that does get people involved. And they do, and it is physical, but then you mentioned mental. As you get physically more adept, it becomes more of a mental game strategically, understanding what you're going to do and thinking through how to get there. Yeah. So it becomes a very mental, strategic thing. Mm-hmm. When you get that dialed, for some people, when they dial it all in, so they're physically fit, appropriate to race and do well, and they've got all the mental stuff dialed, then it becomes a little more emotional. Mm-hmm. You start to appreciate more of the emotional aspects, and eventually, as you go beyond that, for some people, certainly in my experience, there's a spiritual component that not many people necessarily get to. Mm-hmm. I think it's more for those people maybe that way inclined, or they just kind of happen into it over time. So you go through the physical thing and the mental thing and the emotional thing, and then there's this kind of spiritual thing. Like, this is awesome.
Well,
no, I'm just going on another plane, and
what happens is it strips away all the layers of who you think you are, what you think you are, everything you believe.
Oh, yeah.
Your belief system.
Yeah.
Especially if you're out there in the wilderness, kind of forging either on your own or with your teammates, whatever the dynamic is. But you're kind of stripped down to the bare bones. So at some point, there's another piece of you that is exposed. That's your spiritual piece.
That is 100% true. Mm-hmm. I think it's also, there's a lot of allegories and things that go on with life itself. A lot of people will discover a lot more as they push themselves further, because you kind of go outside your envelope, right? So they're thinking, I haven't done this before. This is a new experience. Usually it's not a pleasant experience. It's kind of suffering.
Sometimes no.
But that's the stuff that makes you grow, because you're not going to grow without being stretched a little.
Right.
So pushing those boundaries and getting stretched definitely helps the human grow in every direction, physical, mental, whatever, emotionally. So they understand that box they live in is much bigger than they thought, which to me is another aspect of sport that I think is very healthy for humans, to start thinking critically and outside what they think the reality is. And they discover themselves through this process. And by doing that, you get a better human.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
And this is actually, you didn't ask the question, I'm going to answer somewhat rhetorically. It's what is it about obstacle racing and sport that really drives my involvement,
Mm-hmm.
making better humans.
Nice.
It ultimately makes better humans. I was selfish for so long, getting paid lots of money to win lots of money and get lots of equipment and go cool places, 60 countries to race and be on TV for 13 years. That's selfish. Hopefully it inspires and maybe creates some aspirational thoughts for people, but it's still fairly selfish because everyone else is paying for me.
Right.
So now I'm flipping it over and I'm going, okay, spend all this time taken from sport, now I'm going to get back and make better humans on the way through.
You're paying it forward.
Paying it forward. Not only that, the paying forward is, I think if you touch one person every day positively, that's good. You've done your job as a human, I think. But if you can amplify that, which we do through sport, like your
That's
races,
absolutely what we do.
you provide a platform where you're not affecting just one person, you're affecting 5,000 people at your marathon and their families and their workmates. So that's really 20, 30, 40,000 people and their friends, and maybe they get inspired. So really your touch gets very big very fast. So then you go to I'm going to break the kayak record thought again. It's like, I'm not just going to break it.
Right.
This whole sport thing started me thinking, how do you affect the most people the fastest? Clearly, social media can be a tool if done right. It's also an echo chamber, so it can be kind of a double-edged sword. But if you think about what humans watch or see, what do the most humans on Earth see ever at one time? What is that thing? Are they looking at the moon? Are they watching Fox News? Or what are they doing?
God, I hope not.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that what really
Please tell
engages
me
humans.
that is not it.
No, not even close. When you think about it, you start thinking big sporting platforms, Super Bowl,
Yes.
110 million people. That's a lot of people.
And why are they drawn to that?
Yeah, why are they drawn to
Because
that?
it's their fellow human.
It's a human
right?
thing. Yeah,
like there's a
for sure.
connectedness, and you in some way relate to that fellow human because you are of humanity.
It's social too.
Yeah.
So here's a comment. It's an astute comment from some European colleagues of mine. They laugh when you say the Super Bowl's huge, it's 110 million people. They go, yeah, like a club match in Spain gets more people watching it, which is true. You get more people watching the league football matches in Europe, soccer in Europe, than you do watching the Super Bowl. Every weekend. You've got actually billions of people watching. So that's bigger than American football. But what's bigger than football? Like soccer. The Olympics, they got 5 billion people watching.
Yeah.
So you want to get a lot of people watching something. You want to be on that platform because that's got billions and billions and billions of people. Billions. Now, if you want to influence people on a mass scale, go to the big platform, do a really good job, get something that is achievable, aspirational, inspirational, and something that anyone can do, and then do a selfie with a beer in their hand. And that's obstacle course racing.
Yeah. And that's what you're doing.
And that's what we're doing.
You're working to bring it to the Olympics.
I am working to put the sport together so that we meet the requirements as specified by the International Olympic Committee. That's what I'm doing. And we're fairly well advanced.
I love it.
We believe we'll meet the criteria. We believe we'll meet the criteria next year. At which point, when we believe we do, and we're under evaluation, basically to be a sport. So at that point, we say we believe we meet the criteria. Here's the package. Here's why we believe we meet it, and then we apply for official recognition, basically. And then they do with it what they will. And this is an organization called GAIF, by the way.
Okay.
GAISF, the Global Association of International Sporting Federations, and they're the regulatory body that recognizes sport. And they work very closely with the IOC. As of this year, they have a memorandum of understanding that there's no longer a two-step process. Like get recognized by GAIF, now get recognized by the IOC. That's sort of one thing.
You mean they're talking to each other now?
Very well. Yeah. There was a period. There was a political thing happened, and it kind of went south for a while, but it's all good.
What I see is this really interesting underlying, like just from birth, obviously. Like now we know a lot more about you as a person, and there's this continuously like underlying thread in everything that you do, which is this quest for challenge, without a doubt, and doing something big with your life. I'm super fascinated right now as to where that is coming from. Like, was there one or two people of influence? Was there one or two, or maybe one thing significant in your life that has caused you to be that person, that amount of drive?
Yeah, no one thing. My parents were obviously both inspirational and freeing. Their approach was fairly unusual. This is my real parents, my adopted parents. They were very encouraging of anything. They said, you can do anything you want. If you want to be a carpenter, great. If you want to be you want to be the garbage man, that's great too. So there were no constraints or expectations. The expectation was self-imposed. They were high-performing academics, leading their fields of science globally. So clearly, that's a pretty high bar, but it's a self-imposed bar. You look at your parents and go, I think I want to do that.
Totally.
I think that's normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but at the same time, they would say, you can do whatever you want. You don't want to go to school? We encourage you to go to university. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need to go. You can do amazing things without a university degree. And they also had they were kind of hippies. I mean, they would say, when you turn 10, you can go anywhere you want at any time. Just let us know where you are. So at age of 10, it was gates open. Off you go. So I would take my little sailboat on Sydney Harbour, and I'd sail 16 miles out into the ocean.
At 10?
At 10. Young. Yeah, I was at 10. And I was a little naughty because I didn't always say where I was going. I would pick up a payphone sometimes and say, I'm just around the corner. And as far as they were concerned, I don't think they cared that much. But, I would do that kind of behaviour. And then at 17 years old, decided we'd sail around Australia. And they were encouraging but somewhat concerned because people die doing that.
Yes,
And
yes, they do.
you go into big oceans and there's vast stretches. And finally they I was doing it with a friend of mine from high school, and we actually ended up not going all the way around, but we ended up sailing up to the Great Barrier Reef and all over the place in the South Pacific. And they were quite encouraging, but they were also a little. I can imagine now. I couldn't imagine at the time. I'm like, this is great. And I just imagine your 70-year-old kids taking off into the wild blue ocean on a little sailboat,
Exactly.
going, "Holy crap, that doesn't sound good."
But they didn't stop you.
Oh no, not at all. They were quite encouraging. They did do things like, okay, you're going to get this radio service so that you can always be in touch through the radio service, which in those days is what you had.
Oh, teaching you the skills to do it safely.
Yeah, and they encouraged. I'd been a instructor at a sales school since I was 15, so I knew how to sail. I like to race, so I knew how to sail, which can be bad when you're cruising around in the ocean because you tend to race everywhere. That's not always the safest thing to do.
Yeah.
It can be safe because you get places fast. But they would do things like that. And at one point, after 11th grade, I went to Europe for a few months, and all they did was here's a piece of paper with a couple of phone numbers. If you're in Paris, you can call this number. If you're in London, call that number. Otherwise, no news is good news. See ya.
I love it.
So I worked in a bakery. Actually, I worked in a supermarket and I worked in a bakery, and that's how I earned my pennies to go travel. Same thing in the middle of college. Spent all of 1986, so the end of 1985 to the beginning of 1987, traveling through Europe and Asia and all over the place. Russia, Bulgaria, crazy place you probably shouldn't go. Afghanistan.
Please don't go there anytime soon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was there in '86 from the Khyber Pass. I got to the Khyber Pass, and I was thinking, this is bad. Like, you can hear the guy, like the Russians are in there blowing shit up. And people screaming across the pass with limbs blown off, and I'm going the other direction. I'm going into the fray, and eventually, my nerves nerves couldn't handle it, and I turned around. I actually wanted to cross Afghanistan.
Thank God you did. You might not be here today.
Maybe not. I'm almost not here anyway because I got so sick in that trip. There was a point I got a train from Gilgit down to Karachi, and it's in the higher Himalaya. Kind of at the end of the train line, and caught the train down. I don't remember most of it because I was so sick I'd kind of passed out. Not kind of passed out, I was just out. And got dragged. Finally woke up in a little hostel, someone trying to feed me a mango. And I lost a lot of weight. I was down to about 100 pounds. And all my hair fell out. That's when I lost my hair.
Was it?
1986, May 86. And then I dragged my sorry ass into Pan Am, trying to get out of Pakistan, and got on Pan Am Flight 2. It was
Okay.
one of those old jumbo jets with the two little windows on the top. And they took pity on me that clearly I wasn't in very good shape because basically a skeleton. And they put me up in first class, which was great. So I'm there in first class, pretty much passed out.
Emaciated. Mm-hmm.
Emaciated and passed out. I could barely walk. And then that flight, we took off from Karachi Airport, got over Afghanistan, and then I'm kind of head lolled against the window, and there's MiG fighter jets right next to us.
Oh,
And I'm looking out the window at these MiG fighter jets, not quite comprehending what's going on. And the pilot says something about blah, 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 got to dump some fuel. He's not telling us there's fighter jets. We're over Afghanistan during a war.
yikes.
So he dumps fuel, turns around, goes back to Karachi. And he said, we were just told by the Russians they don't want us over their airspace.
Get the hell out.
Basically get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
So they did.
Mm-hmm.
Smart move. Went back to Karachi. And he said, this is a jinx flight. Every flight, something happens. It was once a week. It was Karachi to Munich. No, yeah, Frankfurt. Karachi to Frankfurt. The very next week, that exact flight, same pilot, same plane, same flight, Pan Am Flight 2 was hijacked.
What?
I don't know if you remember it. They threw bodies out onto the tarmac.
Oh, actually.
The pilots escaped out of the window.
Yes.
Yeah, I was on that flight. I was a jinx that trip because
Oh, crap.
something similar happened I caught the ferry from Dover to Calais, and then I was going to take the ferry back again to Calais, and for some reason I got distracted and went off somewhere else in Europe. Oh, I hitchhiked on a chocolate truck to Portugal. Anyway, so I was on this ferry. The ferry turned around and went back out again, but they forgot to close the thing the cars drive up at the front, and it just went to the bottom.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it went out and sank. Just like that, filled up with water, and went to the bottom. And I just got off the thing.
So
I didn't find out until later, but
you have 9 lives, basically. That's sort of
not
what's
quite,
going
because I
on.
always just miss, right? I'm just missed by one.
Yeah, I really believe everything happens for a reason. I don't know if you do or not, but you're kind of a perfect example of that, right? Like, here you are.
Well, then when I was in London, I was still pretty sick, and I went to London. I went to the hospital, and they said, "Oh, yeah, here's stool sample, urine sample, blood sample, all these samples," and they said, "Come back in a few weeks." I said, "All right, fine," and I didn't. Instead, I got in a chocolate truck, and I ended up in Portugal, and then he turned around and filled it with port and took it back to France.
Oh, nice.
So I was on the chocolate truck, and then from there I went into Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
and then from Morocco, I can't remember what I did. I took the Istanbul Express over to Istanbul.
Okay.
Through Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and all those places at the time. That was exciting, but a little too exciting. I was really fortunate though, because I ended up traveling with the Greek consular general, and we got bad things were happening on the train. There was people with machine guns, and they were trying to gas the train, and it was bad shit. We got off in Sofia, and we escaped the train basically.
Wow, so that's scary.
Yeah, it was scary. That was really scary. But then I got back for some reason. I got a letter from somewhere, and they said, "Oh." It was the months old at this point. I think I was in Moscow at the time. I don't know where I was. The letter said, "You have to get back to the hospital in London immediately." That was like a month
Bad
old.
test.
Like bad shit. You got bad shit going, and get back now.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was actually on my way to Thailand, so I think I blowed that off. But I've survived. Here I am.
So your entire life is about chasing adventure.
I would say not adventure per se, but
Sounds pretty damn adventurous.
the unexpected. I guess in the dictionary definition of adventure, which is a journey with an unexpected outcome, yes.
Yes.
So everything is a journey with an unexpected outcome, and I have no idea what's going to happen with all this stuff. But goals inevitably are realized if they're not completely insane, even the somewhat insane ones.
You've always been living by goals as a core value of you, as a human. Like you're a goal-oriented individual.
Yeah,
so
very much so.
What's next for you? What's next?
In near or long term? Well, that's a good question. In the long term, I want to achieve recognition. I want to get obstacle sports really moving well and efficiently. And there's things we're very fortunate in time because of what's going on in sport. And I'm talking about anti-doping and safe sport and things that are really important for athletes. Because ultimately, the role of the sport is to provide a service and make sport safer, better, more accessible, cheaper. That's what sport should do for the athletes. The athletes don't care about sport, frankly. They don't care, and most of them don't know. What they care about is, can I get to this race? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be cheap enough? Is it going to be accessible enough? If you're a competitive athlete, does it give me a route to something, like a competition of some sort? That's generally what they're thinking. And to get all that, that's why sport exists. Coubertin, Pierre de Coubertin, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who started the Modern Olympics, didn't know it was going to be sport. I believe it was after maybe the Napoleonic Wars, and it was before the First World War, and he was concerned about all these huge political and military problems in Europe, and he wanted to create something that would give people a focus, just like we do today. Like now, it's more about drugs and, I don't know, porn or whatever it is that people get addicted to, and we just create this platform of opportunity to do something healthy and get people to be better humans. And that's what he was trying to do. So being Olympic, or Olympism, if you read about the Olympics, is really about that. Clearly, the commercial aspect relies on very high-level competition, but that's not Olympism. Eddie the Eagle won the Pierre de Coubertin Prize. Eddie the Eagle was not the best ski jumper. He was the worst ski jumper at the Olympics, but he won the big prize.
Because he was a good human.
He's a good human, and he was doing exactly what Pierre de Coubertin described. He was doing this thing because he just loved it, and he was passionate about it, and he did it for all the right reasons. As I think 99% of the people out there doing all sports, obstacle included, they love it. They're intrigued by it. It feeds their soul in some respect. They've got a community. They've got socialization. They've got things that make us people. Lions and tigers and bears don't socialize and do this stuff collectively. We do.
Right. So yourself, in terms of your own value system, being a good human, how you spend your days right now? Give me a rundown of what it looks like. And you're everywhere doing everything. I mean, we're in contact enough for me to know that you're hardly sitting still. However, what's that look like? Give me a day.
On a very basic level, I wake up fairly early, but I usually think. I spend the early part of the day thinking. So maybe 5 a.m., I'll be thinking for a few hours. Usually go to bed thinking about stuff. And there's a lot of processing. So biologically, our brains recover at night when we sleep, and we process a lot of the daily information, and then it kind of congeals in our consciousness. So I have a very conscious, subconscious thing that I go in thinking about it, and I wake up thinking about it. And I know I'm doing it, and I do it purposefully. So there's a few hours, kind of the ends of the day, that I'm really kind of processing the information. And then I typically work about a 14-hour day, usually 7 days a week. Which doesn't make a good human necessarily.
Makes a very busy one.
We're getting Leah and I are the same. My wife and I are the same. She's got a startup business. She has a skincare business, as you know, and she's the same. We're both driven. Yeah. But what we're discovering is this thing called a weekend, which apparently people take time off and they don't do their work stuff.
Right. What's that about?
Well, we've been figuring it out.
Are you trying to bring that back into your life? Is that what you're saying? Or actually, maybe for the first time into your life?
Yeah, probably for the first time. Yeah, probably for the first time. No, that's not true. I think as a young engineer, I would have weekends. Sort of, I guess, because it was all, every waking hour when I was working a regular job was about sport. So every waking hour, I'd be up at first light, my eyes would pop open, and I'd run down to my kayak and go kayaking or something. And then, it would be night before I'd pack up my boat or whatever, a sailing boat or whatever it was. It'd have to be dark, like an impossibility to stop me. I couldn't. I would actually paddle at night. I would paddle home from work at night. It would be full on dark, and I'd be getting my kayak and put my lights on and off. I'd go down the river for 10K.
So if 14 hours a day is spent on driving this project you're so passionate about, and you're now trying to get the weekends to be more about you and Leah and your life as individuals, separate from your work, what kind of fun are you having? What are you doing?
It sort of happened a couple of weekends ago. We built a house in Boulder, and we had nowhere to live, so we Leah cashed in some stocks and bought an Airstream. And we lived in the Airstream, which was super fun.
Love it.
And we built our tiny little house. Well, now we're kind of cash strapped, so we rent our houses because we've got to eat. Yeah. Pretty much.
Exactly.
And what happened was we were renting our house in Boulder, and we went, well, let's take off in the Airstream. So we went off to the mountains, and we're working. It's a mobile office. We've done it. We know how to do it. We've been doing it for years now. So we basically work out of the Airstream, but we've got a truck. We can pull our Airstream. May as well go somewhere nice. So we ended up in Fruita, Western Colorado.
Yes, awesome.
Around the Fruita trails, and we started. And then we would bike in the morning and then work in the afternoon. And we're going, wow, this is really cool. Like, this is great.
Yeah, well,
it's probably what a normal person does, right?
Self-employment is supposed to be where there's a freedom of sort. That's why we pay the high price of risk and everything associated with hard work.
So rather than working 40 nowadays, we're now working like 10-hour days, but spending 4 hours doing something really fun.
I love it.
Which is 10 hours is still a reasonable day, I suppose. But then we're thinking, that was really cool. And then this past weekend, we made this conscious turn off the phones, drive and meet some friends down in Santa Barbara, hang out, drink some wine, go to a meal, and then we drove back over the Ridge Road back behind Santa Barbara, and we're looking at this going, oh man, this is great. What have we been doing for the past 30 years? Yeah. Well, we didn't do this. This is a weekend, I suppose. Yes. This is really fun.
Mm-hmm. and time in silence or together,
We spend a lot of time together. We work effectively in the same office, which is our home, or our Airstream, whatever it is, and we really like each other. That helps.
That is so refreshing. I love that.
We really, really like each other a lot, and we kind of think along the same lines. We're really quite different in a lot of respects, which is necessary, I think. Mm-hmm. We also travel a lot, so that's also, for us at least, that's necessary. Mm-hmm. But we also travel together, and we travel together really well. So I did this little trip just last month, and we went to Madrid, where I was at the first International Safe Sport Conference. This is about preventing sexual harassment and abuse in sport, which we're formalizing in the sport, necessary for all sports, but newish. So we went to Madrid, and I was at the Safe Sport Conference, and then we took a couple of days and visited Leah's family up in the Basque Country, Bilbao, northwest Spain. Which is a great opportunity to catch up with a lot of cousins and people that we like to spend time with. And they have an amazing blue zone kind of life up there where they eat off the land and the food is spectacular. And so we spent a few days. We drove up and back in a few days. And then I went over to Italy for the World Team Challenge in Sardana in Sardinia, another blue zone place. Mm-hmm. And then went over to Bangkok for Sport Accord, which is the meeting of the international sporting organizations, and then continued back to California for a couple of days, and went off to Manila. And that was a 40,000-mile month for me, which is quite a lot, too much. Yeah. But fortunately, Leah came with me for half the trip.
So that helps.
Mm-hmm. So the flight time is not very healthy. Sitting in planes is not good for you.
Right. Yeah, transportation in general. The best, unless it's self-propelled.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So safe sport is an interesting thing. I could go on forever about safe sport. Humans tend to be somewhat predatory in nature, and I think it's biologically driven, just like a pride of lions. The male is there trying to dominate and keep the other females. Well, I think humans are not much different, and it's really unfortunate because it's not acceptable. But they're predators, and there's an unfortunately insignificant number, but enough to make it real. A small number, but significant number of humans, males and females, as it turns out. Correct. Male and female predators, and it's really appalling. And sport is a ripe environment because you've got coaches in a position of power and influence with kids. Yeah. It's a bad environment. Yeah. It's an amazing environment for the right things and an appalling environment for the wrong things.
So you're putting some personal effort behind that cause?
It's kind of big on my personal agenda is to we've got the opportunity to build safe sport into the very fabric of obstacle sports.
Oh, right.
No federation
ground up.
Yeah, no federation has done this because they're legacy federations, and they're kind of trying to coordinate
bad behaviors.
Mm-hmm. They're coordinating different things, development and coaching and medical, and trying to coordinate them all to create the safe sports. Some do a great job, by the way. But it's not the easiest thing in the world. So we just went from the ground up. So when I was out in Madrid, connected with a bunch of people there, and now we've got an amazing woman heading it up. So Dr. I can't pronounce the full name, so I just call her Yetza. But Dr. Yetza is, she's a Yale professor, Harvard educated, medical professional, was a high jumper for Ghana, I believe. Incredible individual. So she's agreed to help shape and head up Safe Sport as its own committee within obstacle sports, which is unique at this point. No one's done that. That's one thing we're doing.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
If we can just as humans use a lot of that kind of energy, the competitive predator type of energy, and channel it into competition and sport, it'd be much healthier.
Yeah.
But sports in general, if they're done right, and if the coaches and the environment and the parents and the community that is, facilitating the sport, if they set the standards and the value system, then that's generally how it develops. So you are doing that right now. You've been doing that your whole life, really. So thank you for that.
In some respects, yeah, this is the opportunity of obstacle sports becoming a sport. And there's plenty of naysayers, which is understandable because they don't understand what the benefits are, or if it benefits them. And people tend to be quite inward-looking. They don't typically or necessarily see the big picture. But things like safe sport and anti-doping and safety standards is another one. People misunderstand standards. They go, "Oh, you're trying to standardize the sport. That's bad. It's going to be this thing that we don't do." That is not standards. Standards are build whatever obstacle you want, but it better be structurally, it better be designed right, built right, maintained right, and sound enough that it copes with every possible thing you could throw it and not collapse and kill people.
Right.
That's a standard.
Safety.
That's a safety standard. That's the stuff we work on with the International Standards Working Group in the ASTM international system, which is a real standard. It's the real thing. There's standards for everything. Standards for airbags and cars and medicine and there's standards for also transmission of electricity and fuel transport. They've all got standards.
Why? Because humans do crazy things.
Humans are idiots.
So we need to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we do. So we have medical standards and obstacle standards, and we have these standards, and it doesn't affect the sport. In fact, intrinsically, obstacle sports are a dynamic, growing, unexpected thing that goes in strange directions, and that's what we want to encourage.
Sure. We
encourage the changes and the difference and the evolution, and that's good. That's healthy. That's necessary, I think. Hence is Ninja Warrior part of it, and is Expedition OCR Primal? Because that part of it? Yeah, well, sure it is. Why not? It's innovative. It's different. It allows people to do more stuff. It's got the same goals, the same basic principles. It's great.
Yeah. I think we're going to wrap.
Yeah, I think that's great.
So I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to spending time with you at Primal Quest.
Yeah.
Working on the OCR World Championship race together. That'll be super fun.
Looking forward to it.
You have a fantastic place here in your backyard.
Oh,
thank you. Might throw a little bit of spear before I go, or
sure,
some rope.
Of course.
We'll see. We'll see what we got. Thanks, Ian. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ian, for taking us on your truly incredible life journey and helping us discover your why. And thank you for joining us on this trip to Endurance Town, USA, where we always dive deep into the story of why these humans use the common thread of endurance to weave their world. Thanks to our partners at Race Roster for making this Faces Behind the Races podcast series possible. And if you haven't yet, subscribe today to have new episodes delivered as soon as they're available. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time we go on a journey to Endurance Town, USA.
Bring it back.